Fine.
Good. Okay, we're ready to start. You could start. My name is, start out.
You want me to start now?
Begin now and kind of look this way. Here. That's good.
My name is Dora Zaidenweber, spelled Z as in zebra, Aidenweber. My maiden name is Eiger, Eiger. I was born in Radom, Radom, Poland, Poland.
In what year?
In 1924. My family consisted of my father, Isaiah Eiger, and my mother, Hannah, and my brother, David.
Was your family religious family?
Pardon?
Was your family religious?
My family was secular, but observed Jewish holidays, and we were a part of the Jewish community, an active part of the Jewish community. My brother and I attended school in Radom. He was a year and a half older than I was. By 1939, I was 15 and my brother was not quite 17 when the war broke out. At that point, our education ended with the Nazi occupation of our hometown. Radom was a city of about 100,000 population with a sizable Jewish, very active Jewish population. It was an industrial city, and later when the Jews were subjected to a great deal of persecution, we stayed in Radom for a few years and were in a ghetto in Radom and in a forced labor camp. The reason we stayed in, the younger people who were not deported, stayed in Radom was because there were a number of industries there in which we were employed while still living in the a ghetto was a section of a city that was set apart for the Jewish population. That was the initial stage of the general Jewish persecution, which ended up or resulted in the destruction of most of the people, most of the inhabitants of my city. Out of the some 25,000, perhaps fewer than 2,000 survived, and most of them were young, just as I was. At the time of liberation, I was 21 years old.
When you were in school, did you notice or experience any anti-Semitism while you were in school?
I attended a Jewish day school. So I did not experience any anti-Semitic excesses in that school. But my brother, who attended a general school for people who were Jewish and those who were not, did. And I know of other people, friends of mine, who did experience anti-Semitic excesses in school.
What business was your father in? Your father?
My father was an accountant.
Okay.
And he had an office in our home, and also worked on the premises of his clients, who were basically businesses.
Okay. In the family, in home, what languages did you speak?
Well, we spoke Polish at home, but we also, as a community, we used Yiddish, which is a little similar to German. In school, we all had to take a foreign language. That foreign language was German. So we were fluent in German as well. And in the school that I attended to, we also studied Hebrew as well as Latin, which was not a spoken language essentially, but Hebrew was. So at the present time, I'm fluent in 4 languages, plus partly fluent in Hebrew.
Oh, I see. Can you tell me a little bit about your extended family?
We had a large extended family in Radom. Most of them lived in Radom. There were a few of our family who moved away to a different city, but I had of living relatives. I had a great-grandmother, living great-grandmother, a grandmother, one grandmother, and numerous aunts, uncles, great-aunts and uncles, and cousins. Of all my extended family, only one uncle survived. Miraculously, of my immediate family, both my parents and my brother survived.
Why do you think they survived?
Why did we survive? Well, my father was having been a prominent member of the Jewish community, was arrested in 1942, a few months ahead of the major deportation of the entire Radom ghetto. He was sent to Auschwitz, and he survived there. Amazingly, he did. Out of more than 200 men who were arrested that night, and that was the leadership of the Jewish community of Radom, 100 were executed, shot on the spot, and the other 100 was sent to Auschwitz. Of those in Auschwitz, only 3 survived, and one of them was my father. But he had a very long story about Auschwitz. He was there from May of 1942 until October of 1944.
Did he have a job in Auschwitz?
He did have a job. He had lots of jobs. At first he had some back-breaking jobs. Later, because he was fluent in a number of languages, he was selected to be a registrar, one who registered the arrivals. You understand that Auschwitz was an international camp. It didn't only have Jews there, although most Jews who arrived in Auschwitz were eventually disposed of, or right from the beginning, from the time that they arrived, they were destined to be gassed and incinerated. But there were also non-Jews who were brought, political prisoners, and whatever criteria they used. There were a lot of criminals. There were homosexuals who were brought to Auschwitz. All kinds of people of different nationalities from all over Europe, speaking different languages, and so they needed the interpreters who were able to speak to those people. And my father was one of them, and that probably contributed to the fact that he was able to survive.
Did he have a tattoo?
Oh yes. Everybody who was alive for any length of time had a tattoo. Only those who were immediately gassed did not receive tattoos. I was in Auschwitz for 6 months, and I do have that tattoo.
I'd like to take a picture of that tattoo. Let's see. Oh, wow.
It's small.
I'm going to take another picture a little later.
Okay.
So, and your mother?
My mother had the next number to mine.
Did your mother or did you have any job in Auschwitz?
Well, we got to Auschwitz, as I mentioned, we worked in Radom, first in the ghetto, and then later in a forced labor camp, which was in a different section, and after that in yet another part of Radom, which was a concentration camp. I worked in a weapons factory, making small handheld guns. And it wasn't until 1944 when this camp was liquidated and we were transported on foot. We marched out of Radom westward and eventually arrived in Auschwitz. So I was in Auschwitz only until January of 1945. From April of 1944, pardon me, not April, from August of 1944 until January of 1945, at which time the Allied troops were closing in on Auschwitz, and we were marched out of Auschwitz again on foot for 3 days, and then put on trains and transported to a camp named Bergen-Belsen.
I understand that
a
was
death
another
camp. Pardon?
That was another extermination camp.
Yeah. Those were both extermination camps for Jews, Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen.
And your mother?
My mother and I, well, you have to consider that my mother at the time, in 1944, she was only 46 years old.
Wow, yeah.
And I was 20, so we were still young and able to work. But in Bergen-Belsen, where they starved us to death, and I was deathly ill with spotted typhus, I barely survived. And when I survived, I weighed about 50 pounds.
Wow.
When we were liberated on April 15th of 1945, I weighed about 50 pounds.
And who liberated you?
The British forces liberated us at Bergen-Belsen. But my brother was in a different camp, and he was liberated by American forces. My father was yet in a different camp, and he was liberated by the Red Army, the Russian army.
Very interesting. So can you tell me, after you were liberated, can you tell me a little bit about where you went? And
after we were liberated, my mother and I, we stayed at Bergen-Belsen. We had no idea where or if anybody else was alive. Communications were pretty much in ruin. And we had to recover from the horrible ordeal of Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. And eventually, my brother and my father independently found out where we were. And that's how we were reunited. Approximately, well, my brother in about July of 45, and my father came in about late August of 1945. And then we settled, so we moved from the camp. It was called the Displaced Persons Camp, DP
Yes.
Camp. We moved from the DP camp from the British zone where the British had liberated us, and we moved to the American zone. There was a displaced persons camp in Stuttgart, which is where we lived, the city of Stuttgart. My father then found out where we were. How they found out was that Jewish chaplains of the American armed forces, knowing the problem of lack of communication, people looking for relatives or friends, they traveled to the different DP camps and took lists of survivors who were living there and then exchanged them, gave them to the various places where people were concentrated, and that's how they found where we were, in the British zone.
Oh, very interesting.
And then,
so how long were you in a displaced persons camp?
my husband and I stayed in a displaced person camp until 1950, when we came to the United States. He and I, and my brother as well, studied in Germany at the German university and came to the United States and settled in Minneapolis.
Oh, so right from when you got off the ship in...
we came by ship.
You came by ship. And where did you land in America?
In,
go through
in
Ellis
New
Island?
York.
Ellis Island?
No.
No.
I think Ellis Island was already closed by then.
Okay.
We landed in New York. We were sponsored here by Jewish organizations, and other people, other non-Jews, were also sponsored by other social agencies in various cities, and that's how they were spread out to various communities. Otherwise, they would all be in New York.
So tell me about when you met your husband, and you met your husband in the
Well, we were from, no, before that. We lived near, as neighbors in the ghetto, and so that's how we met.
Oh, and you were married there?
Well, we were married when we were married.
Okay. So you arrived in Minneapolis.
Yes.
I mean, that's where, and that is up to date. Can you tell me a little bit about your life in Minneapolis after you arrived here?
Well, it's been a very good life in Minneapolis. I lost both my parents at a young age. My mother died still in Germany at the age of 50, only 3 years after she was liberated. My father came to the United States and died here in Minneapolis at age 62 in 1960. My brother lived to be 71. He died in 1994, and I'm the only survivor, the only one left of those four of us who survived.
And what you have been doing?
The rest of the family all perished. All my great-grandmother, my grandmother, all the aunts and uncles and great-aunts and uncles, and all my cousins of all ages perished.
Wow. Can you tell me a little bit about the work you've been doing? You've been living here in Minneapolis, and you've been active. I would like to know a little bit about your lifestyle here in Minneapolis.
Well, my husband was an electrical engineer. I was an accountant. We both had very nice careers. We had a very good life. We had 2 children, a daughter who is an attorney, and a son who's a computer engineer, a software development engineer. And now we have 5 wonderful grandchildren. My brother also had a family. He married here, and they had 3 children and have 4 grandchildren. So we had a very lovely family. We were very close, my brother's family and my family. Initially, more people did not really want to talk about the Holocaust. We had a need to talk about it because we thought that nobody knew what was going on in Europe. Of course, that was not the case. It was pretty well known what the Nazis were doing to the Jewish people of Europe. But we had a need to tell the stories because most people did not survive. They didn't have, there was nothing left of their lives. One really had to educate. And there was a lesson to be learned. There still is. There forever will be a lesson to be learned from the experience, the Jewish experience of the Second World War. It happened in Europe, a continent that everybody probably thought was a very civilized one, perpetrated by a nation that was considered to be very civilized and of very high culture. They certainly contributed a great deal of culture to the culture of the world. But what happened there? A breakdown of human values, a breakdown of decency, of the rights of humans to a life. I mean, to just think of taking human beings and gassing them and shooting them and burying them in mass graves. It was not believable. It was hard for us to believe that this was happening. Certainly it would be very difficult for anybody else to believe. And we had the obligation for future generations to inform and educate. And so for 40 years, that's what I dedicated my life to. I was speaking to teachers, community groups, high schools, universities. I traveled to the several surrounding states and did workshops and lectures. I still do some speaking, but of course now it's much more difficult for me to travel to various places because I can no longer drive. And it's the novelty has worn off. I think that what we're seeing happening now in the world, the disregard, the terrorism, the violence that comes to our living rooms until the television screen every day, I think it desensitizes people. But to me, this is a perfect proof of what the world has learned from the Holocaust. I think it's much easier to believe it now than it would have been then, because we see how human life is very, very cheap. And it started with our lives, who were very, very cheap.
Yeah, that is a sad story. Yeah. Let's see. I think you did real well, and
okay.
I think
you have enough.
Only 24 minutes, but
okay.
It was wonderful.
That's just right.
It is just right.
I mean, there's no point in going into details.
Look, I'd like to just ask you one other question.
Yeah.
Before we close and stop.
Okay.
You were in Auschwitz, and you were in Bergen-Belsen. Can you tell me some of the things that you witnessed, that you saw? Did you see some shootings or torture, or can you tell me what you remember seeing firsthand?
Well,
Right.
I didn't see any torture. I, of course, saw a lot of shooting. Not exactly at Auschwitz, but I told you that we were on two marches,
Right.
each one of 3 days duration, in July of 1944 and in January of 1945. And there was an enormous amount of shooting because people couldn't continue walking, so they stopped or they sat down at the side of the road and they were shot in the head. So yes, I did see a lot of that. Now, I don't know what all qualifies as torture for the average person, but the fact that we were being starved,
That's torture.
that's torture.
Oh my God.
The fact that I weighed 50 pounds when I was liberated, and my normal weight was usually around 120, I think that was torture.
Certainly.
Yeah. We slept in Bergen-Belsen. We slept on straw on the floor, and the lice were eating us. And of course, ultimately, because lice carry the typhus bug, we became very ill, and it's a deadly disease, typhus. I think that's torture. At the end, if you'd ever see pictures of the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, what my eyes saw, were piles of bodies everywhere. Tens of thousands of bodies of people who died. They weren't shot. They weren't killed. They were killed by the starvation and the disease. All the food we got in Bergen-Belsen for the from February to the middle of April, I think it added up to about 10 weeks. We got rutabagas boiled in water once a day.
Wow.
The equivalent probably of a cup. I think that's some kind of torture.
It certainly is. Can you tell me what time of the year you were there? What the weather and the time of year that you were there.
From January,
weather conditions,
in Bergen-Belsen, we arrived on January 25th, 1945, one day after my 21st birthday, which was on the 24th, the day before. And we were liberated on April 15th of 1945. That was in Bergen-Belsen. In Auschwitz, we were from August, I believe it was August 6th. I have some documents from Auschwitz, which are now, of course, available, and I believe our transport arrived on the 6th of August. We left Auschwitz on, I believe, the 18th of January of 1945, and arrived in Bergen-Belsen 7 days later. But that, of course, included the 3 days march, and then the rest of the days, the 4 days, in open boxcars. Now that's winter. That was in the winter.
Were you well clothed? Did you have clothes?
Oh, we weren't very well clothed, no. I can tell you that, no. In fact, a very interesting little thing, bit of information. On that march from Auschwitz on for 3 days in January, I acquired frostbitten toes. All my small toes, the 4 toes on each foot, are frostbitten. And all these years, I've had a feeling of numbness. They've been numb.
Yes.
They didn't really I could function very well. My walk wasn't affected. But they were, when I went to bed, I had this little tingling. But now, all these years later, I have terrific pain in my toes. And just today, it isn't constant, but it comes and goes. And this morning, it was so bad, this morning and afternoon. And sometimes a heating pad helps it somewhat. But that's an effect more than 60 years later, 65 to be precise. Yeah, that's torture. That's a form of torture.
You bet.
Today I felt like I was being tortured. But also you have to consider that the knowledge of what was going on resulted in constant fear. It was not just fear, it was terror. When you were in Auschwitz and the chimneys were spewing out the ashes and the smell, the terrible smell of burning bodies. You know what it's like if you singe your skin.
Yes.
Imagine this, from thousands of bodies being burned every day and every night. I mean, there you were in the barrack, and there was this tiny window that through it you could see the 5 chimneys, which were working 24 hours, but at night you could see the flame. It was like a huge tall candle. The impression that you had, and the fear that this you were gripped in, because you think, well, the big joke in quotation marks was the only way of Auschwitz was through the chimneys. But some of us made it out of Auschwitz, which was really more the amazing thing.
Yeah. The amazing thing was, so many people have said
but when
they survived because of luck. They were just lucky. And it was good that you had a job and had something to do. And that you were young and that you were strong. That was
the chance that we were given. When you were young and strong and healthy, you had a bit of a chance. But if you were women who were a little older than we were, in their mid-20s and had young children, they weren't given the chance.
That's right.
They perished as well.
Yeah,
it's so unbelievable.
It's so hard. You cannot understand.
Yeah.
There's no way you can understand what happened. It just...
That's right. But you have to believe it. It really happened. It really happened.
Well, I think that you are convincing a lot
Those eyes saw it happen.
Yes. You certainly are convincing.
Millions and millions of people. Just imagine that. But they destroyed not only the people, they also destroyed the culture.
Yes.
The terrific accomplishments of the Jewish people of Europe, this was largely destroyed with the people. And the potential. To this day, I'm thinking of, there were 12 grandchildren, 12 of us, including my brother and me. And they all perished, but the 2 of us, so 10. 10 of them perished. And that's just a small example of one family. The potential that those children had.
Yes.
My aunts and uncles were all young too. They were actually, my father was the oldest in his family. My mother was she had an older brother, but not much. I mean, they were all young. They were all in their 30s.
Yeah,
I dare somebody who's in their 30s and 40s say that those were old people.